chapter 8. 8. Chapter 8, 1 Kings. Now let me give you a little bit of introduction here to this week's lesson. If I was to read all of the scriptures that I guess covered today's lessons, we wouldn't have time. This actually is we're going to be reading a prayer, right, of King Solomon. King Solomon, if you remember, or if you don't know, the great, right? You know, when the Israelites finally had kings, there was King Saul, there was King David, the second one, and then he had a son, Solomon. Remember, he was the wisest of kings. Well, you know, David himself was, you know, we like to think, I don't know, you roll back the clock, you kind of think David, he's a good old shepherd, right? Just out there in the field, watching his sheep, smoking a cigarette, dipping some skull. Seems very peaceful. But you know, the Bible refers to David in later times as a man of war. And if you read the scriptures, you'll find very quickly. Remember the crowds would say, Saul, thousand, David killed 10,000. And if you read the scriptures, you'll find very quickly that David he was quite a leader, quite a ruler, quite a conqueror, right? For God's word. He turned out to be quite the man that we read about as the one killing the bear and the lion in the field. I'd probably climb a tree. But a man of war. And there was a reason that David didn't build the first temple. Now, we're talking about the first Jewish temple. Now, let's talk about a little bit the history behind the temple. Remember the story of the wilderness and the Hebrews, Israelites, right, coming out of Egypt. Remember the tabernacle they built? Every time they moved, they packed it up, carried it with them, and then set it back up again. And this wasn't a matter of just setting up the baptistry, right? This is big time. I mean, a lot of work, setting the posts and the material, all that they made too. There came a time when that mobile part of the tabernacle became something very permanent. And that was the first temple. And it's sort of the subject surrounding the subject of the lesson today, that when finally God said, build me a temple. Build me a permanent temple. Well, there's probably some relief on behalf of the Hebrews, right? But the old temple, as we know it, now they weren't probably traveling at this time, was pretty much a tent. And within the tent, one of the most important pieces they had was the Ark of the Covenant. Within the Ark of the Covenant was the tablets, right? The Ten Commandments, among other things. But that was key, and those were sort of pieces. And, you know, we're not talking about being idolaters here. We're talking about things that God has set aside as sacraments, right, for a specific purpose that we look to, right? We recall his greatness and what he's done down the way. You know, there are things about that temple that they built, this permanent temple, and I'm not going to go into any detail of how elaborate it was, because, you know, Solomon was a wealthy guy. Not only was the smartest character around, but everything he did seemed to, right, everything he touched turned to gold, right? He was very, very wealthy.